Tonight with two ingenious solutions to Florida's ongoing battles with wild reptiles. And for that, we take you to opposite ends of the technology spectrum. First, high-tech solution. Florida is deploying robotic rabbits to help capture invasive Burmese pythons.
The Everglades in Florida now has a new ruler, and it is the Burmese python. It devours almost anything, hides in plain sight, and makes humans feel helpless. Locals have tried every trick to stop them.
So now these researchers have technology on their side with the help of a robot rabbit.
Yet the snakes have always stayed one step ahead. So scientists decided to try something no one saw coming: tiny robotic rabbits. It sounded almost unbelievable. But once those robots hit the swamp, what happened next was so insane that even the experts were stunned. The Everglades under siege. The Florida Everglades was once one of the most peaceful places in the United States. It stretched for miles with slow-moving water, tall sawgrass, and the soft calls of birds that filled the morning air. Animals like otters, raccoons, and deer lived freely, and the swamps felt alive from sunrise to sunset. People who grew up near the Everglades remember how the land always felt busy in its own silent way. But over time, something began to change. The sounds of the swamp started to fade, and it no longer felt as lively as it once did. Locals began to notice that something was wrong, and a silent feeling of unease slowly settled over the land. Here's the thing. The Everglades did not just become silent on its own. A new predator had slipped into the waters, moving so quietly that most people didn't notice it until the damage was already done. These predators are the Burmese pythons, massive snakes that can swallow almost anything. Once they established their home in the swamp, the ecosystem quickly began to deteriorate. In fact, before anyone realized it, the invasion had already taken hold. What was once a lively home for animals now felt like the snakes had claimed it as their own silent kingdom. Now, the story of how these snakes arrived in Florida is one people still talk about because, believe it or not, they are not even originally from here. They came all the way from Southeast Asia, where they ruled jungles and marshes as powerful hunters. Back in the 1970s and 80s, exotic pets became very popular across the United States, and pet stores were filled with unusual animals like lizards, snakes, and colorful birds from faraway countries. One of the people's favorites was the Burmese python. When they are small, they look calm and harmless, fitting perfectly into children's hands, and owners love showing them off. However, what these people don't realize is that these pets continue to grow, and they have no idea what they are bringing into their homes. Burmese pythons don't stay small and cute for long. They grow very fast. In fact, some grow as long as 10, 15, or even 20 feet. And before you know it, they've become far stronger than their owners. Additionally, many people were unprepared for what was coming. Once the snakes grew too large and wild to handle, some owners panicked. Instead of taking them to shelters or calling wildlife authorities, out of fear, they drove the snakes to nearby canals or the edges of the Everglades and simply released them. Meanwhile, reptile breeders were also keeping large numbers of snakes in private facilities, which only added to the growing risk that something much bigger was on its way. Then, in 1992, something happened that changed everything. Hurricane Andrew. The storm tore across South Florida with unbelievable force, ripping roofs off buildings and destroying entire neighborhoods. It was one of the strongest hurricanes the state had ever seen. But here's the part many people do not realize. When the storm destroyed reptile houses and breeding centers, hundreds of snakes escaped into the wild. They mixed with the pythons that had already been released by owners and quickly formed a population strong enough to survive on its own. This moment became one of the turning points in the story of the Florida Everglades. Interestingly, the Everglades turned out to be the perfect home for the pythons. It was more like a paradise. The weather here was warm, there was water everywhere, and there was more than enough prey to go around. Birds, rabbits, raccoons, and even young alligators became their everyday meals. With so much food and almost no natural predators to stop them, the pythons settled in quickly. In addition, they could lay around 100 eggs in a single season, and those eggs would hatch in a swamp that practically welcomed them. Before long, the snakes spread deeper into the wetlands like a silent army. They were no longer just surviving. They were thriving. In fact, biologists now estimate that tens of thousands of pythons roam South Florida, and some experts think the number could be even higher. Every time hunters believe they are making progress, the snakes seem to appear in even greater numbers. The Everglades, once a safe and lively home for countless animals, is now ruled by a predator that was never meant to be there. But it didn't stop there. What these snakes have done to the food chain is truly unsettling. Researchers from the University of Florida report that in certain parts of the Everglades, populations of rabbits, raccoons, and opossums have declined by more than 90%. Even deer, which once moved through the swamps in herds, are becoming rare in certain areas. The pythons eat them all, and the fragile balance that kept the Everglades healthy is collapsing one meal at a time. Now, this invasion did not stay inside the swamp. It started creeping into neighborhoods, and people living near the Everglades began waking up to strange and unsettling sights. Some discovered snakes coiled under their cars, while others watched them sliding silently across driveways late at night. One family even found a massive python inside their chicken coop, and another saw a huge one slither across a busy road as if it owned the place. Stories like these spread quickly, leaving parents worried about their children and pet owners afraid to let their animals outside for too long. For years, people were frustrated, scared, and tired of watching their land change in such a heartbreaking way. They wanted answers, solutions, and something that could finally turn the tide. Authorities and wildlife experts tried their best to control the growing problem, but the snakes always seemed one step ahead. Hunters waded through muddy water and thick grass, using lights, boats, and all the tools they had to track them. Yet the Everglades is too vast and wild to cover completely. For every python caught, dozens more were hiding nearby, blending perfectly into the swamp. The people keep fighting, but the battle for the Everglades is slipping away. How do you even stop a predator that always seems one step ahead? The losing battle to take over the Everglades. The python invasion kept spreading through the Everglades, and everyone knew they had to act before the swamp completely fell apart. Hunters, wildlife officers, and even volunteers stepped in, ready to take on the snakes. But here's the thing. The snakes were smarter, more silent, and sneakier than anyone expected. With thick plants, dark water, and endless hiding spots, the Everglades quickly turned the hunt into a slow, frustrating game, where the snakes always seemed one step ahead. But the authorities didn't give up. They were determined to take back the Everglades, no matter the cost. The first major move was organizing python hunts. Officials offered rewards to get people motivated. And that's how the Python Challenge was born. Hunters could earn money based on the number and length of snakes they captured. Before long, videos of massive pythons being dragged from the swamps spread like wildfire on social media, and everyone talked about it as if it were a sport. Still, even with hundreds of people joining in, the snakes kept multiplying, almost as if the hunts hadn't even happened. The hunters soon realized the pythons were far smarter than anyone expected. The snakes could blend perfectly into the swamp, making them almost invisible. Even the best hunters would walk right past without noticing. So the scientists understood they needed something smarter and more reliable to outsmart these snakes. This was when they brought in python-sniffing dogs called Truman and Eleanor. These dogs were specially trained to smell the python scent in the air and follow it through thick plants and tall grass. Truman, a sleek black Labrador, and Eleanor, a clever golden retriever, worked like detectives on 4 legs. They worked relentlessly and often found snakes faster than any human could. The idea looked promising at first because the dogs were quick, sharp, and surprisingly brave. The dogs alerted their handlers by barking or stopping suddenly whenever they caught a scent. Once a snake was found, the team moved in quickly. Videos of Truman and Eleanor at work went viral in the media, and for some time, it seemed like the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. The dogs were smart, loyal, and completely focused, and every python they helped catch felt like a small but meaningful victory in an endless battle. However, there was a serious challenge. The Everglades is full of danger. Alligators are waiting in the water, panthers are hiding in the brush, and deep muddy areas can trap even the strongest animals. Many parts of the swamp were simply too risky for the dogs to explore, and handlers could not push them into unsafe zones. This meant that while the dogs were helpful, they were only able to search a small part of the huge Everglades. And as a result of this, they can't really solve this problem completely. Then Florida came up with one of the boldest ideas it ever tested. They introduced something called scout snakes. It sounded strange at first, but it was surprisingly clever. Scientists captured a few male pythons, attached tiny trackers to them, and let them go back into the wild. The plan was simple. Male pythons spend most of their time searching for females, so instead of sending humans into the swamp, they let the snakes guide the team straight to the real threat, which were the large breeding females. And at first, it seems like they've finally found the solution. The tracker would start pinging, the team would push through the brush, and they would sometimes find a huge female curled around a nest. Moments like that gave everyone hope. But unfortunately, this method had its limits. The males did not always travel far. Some slipped into remote parts of the swamp where signals faded, and others wandered in ways the team could not predict. It helped the scientists learn more, but it still was not enough to turn the situation around. Scientists did not let any of this slow them down. They kept searching for better ways to control the invasion, and that was when they started using drones. These small flying cameras moved over the Everglades from above, looking for warm shapes on the ground. Since snakes warm their bodies in the sun, the idea was to spot their heat early in the morning when the air was cooler. It sounded modern and hopeful, and for a while, many people thought it would make a difference. But as usual, the Everglades is a tricky place. The snakes blended into the land too well. Warm soil, rocks, and even patches of mud confused the cameras. Many of the shapes that seemed like snakes were not snakes at all. So even though the drones helped a little, they still could not find enough snakes to slow the invasion. At this point, it felt like nothing was working. The pressure kept building, and the local community felt it more with each passing year. People just wanted their land back, the land they remembered before the invasion took over. But while everyone searched for answers, the pythons kept multiplying, moving through the Everglades faster than any solution could stop them. So behind closed doors, scientists and engineers started working on a new idea. It was unusual, bold, and almost unbelievable. They had already seen the old methods fail. The snakes were too silent, too hidden, and too good at surviving. They slipped past dogs, fooled drones, avoided hunters, and outlasted trackers. Everyone knew the usual tricks were no longer enough. The only path forward was to think bigger and design something that could move through the Everglades without fear, without slowing down, and without ever getting tired. But the answer was not another hunter walking through the mud or another trap in the grass, but something completely different. Something that moved through the Everglades the same way the pythons did. Something that could slip through tight spaces, glide over water, and keep going long after humans got tired. The idea sounded unusual at first, but the more they talked about it, the more it started to make sense. Robotic Rabbit takes on the invasion. Now, this idea started when scientists discovered something interesting. Burmese pythons had an unusually strong reaction to marsh rabbits, not just any rabbits. Interestingly, these marsh rabbits used to be everywhere in the Everglades before the pythons arrived, but their numbers had dropped so low that they were nearly extinct. Yet, the snakes still reacted strongly to their scent. At first, the researchers tried using live rabbits in cages to lure the pythons, but people quickly raised concerns. Animal rights groups were upset, and even some scientists felt it was wrong. The marsh rabbits were already rare, and putting the few left at risk just didn't feel right. So they asked themselves a question that would change everything. What if they could create something that acted just like a marsh rabbit, but wasn't alive? Something that could trick the pythons without putting any real animals in danger. This was how they came up with the robotic rabbit. The South Florida Water Management District joined forces with engineers at the University of Florida, and together they started building small machines that could copy the movements, warmth, and smell of real marsh rabbits. Honestly, the whole concept didn't really make sense at first. Even members of the team reportedly laughed about it. However, the more they discussed it, the more it began to feel like a real opportunity. If they could fool a python well enough to trigger a strike, then they could collect information that no drone or scent dog had ever been able to gather. Of course, it was never going to be easy to convince one of the strongest and most alert predators in the Everglades that a machine was real food. Pythons rely on sight, scent, heat, and vibration to understand everything around them, so the engineers had to copy all of that. They built heated cores that gave off warm body temperatures, added soft, flexible limbs that twitched the way a nervous rabbit might move, and installed tiny motion sensors so the robot could shift or wiggle whenever something passed nearby. It was careful work, and every detail mattered, because fooling a python meant matching the things it was already used to in nature. They also used scent pads coated with marsh rabbit pheromones to complete the illusion and make the robots smell real. On top of that, they added GPS trackers and tiny cameras inside the rabbits so every encounter could be recorded from beginning to end. After months of testing and adjusting, the first group of robotic rabbits was finally ready. The team placed the decoys near known python hotspots just before sunset, the time when the snakes usually begin to move. Then they stepped back and waited, watching the area from a safe distance. Once the robotic rabbits disappeared into the swamp, the team held their breath. Before long, the Everglades answered back. And what those tiny machines recorded would shock everyone watching. In just a few days, the moment they had been hoping for finally happened. A python slid out from under a thick patch of grass, its tongue flicking as it picked up the scent around the rabbit. It moved closer, slowly and carefully. The robotic rabbit lifted one leg exactly the way it had been programmed. In an instant, the python struck, wrapped itself around the decoy, and tightened its coils with full strength. When the team reviewed the footage, they were shocked. The robot stayed together. The snake reacted exactly as expected. And the GPS and camera captured every second of the encounter. This single encounter changed everything. For the first time, researchers could watch the snake's natural approach, see how it positioned its body before the strike, and observe the exact moment it chose to attack. The footage even captured the path the python used to slip away, and the hiding spot it retreated to once it sensed something was off. No drone, no hunter, and no scent-tracking dog had ever revealed this much detail. The data that changes everything. Researchers were encouraged by this success, so they decided to expand the project. They placed more than 40 robotic rabbits across different parts of the Everglades, each one linked to remote monitors, camera traps, and thermal drones. Some were set near tree islands, others along quiet water paths, and several were tucked deep inside thick sawgrass where pythons liked to hunt. Every decoy became a small lookout point, quietly watching the swamp and waiting for whatever would come next. Within the first month, the robotic rabbits captured dozens of attacks on camera, and things escalated quickly from there. Some pythons wrapped around them with full strength, squeezing as if they had caught real prey. Others dragged the robots toward hidden burrows, almost like they were storing food for later. And while all of that looked wild, the real breakthrough came from the tiny GPS signals each rabbit carried. Step by step, the robots were quietly drawing maps of movement routes, resting spots, and secret breeding areas no one had ever found before. With each discovery, something surprising happened. For the first time in years, it felt like humans finally had the upper hand in the fight against the python invasion. And as more data rolled in, the robotic rabbits slowly became more than simple bait. They turned into tiny scouts, collecting information that completely changed how experts understood the Everglades. Each strike, each little twitch, and each slow approach was captured by the sensors, cameras, and trackers inside the decoys. At first, the team focused on the basics, such as which rabbits drew more snakes or how quickly the pythons attacked. But as the numbers kept growing, something unexpected began to happen. Patterns started to form. Patterns the human eye could never catch on its own. Slowly, the swamp started giving away its secrets, one robot at a time. Also, from those early patterns came one of the biggest surprises. The team realized the pythons were not wandering around the swamp the way everyone believed. Instead, they were moving along hidden paths that worked almost like invisible highways. These routes linked their favorite hunting spots, resting areas, and even secret breeding zones. The snakes used them because the paths kept them safe and helped them move faster without being noticed. Once scientists figured this out, everything changed. They could now guess where the snakes were going before they even got there. And just like that, the Everglades felt a little less mysterious and a little easier to understand. And it didn't stop there. The video recordings also uncovered behaviors no one had documented before. Pythons approached the rabbits slowly, flicking their tongues to test for heat and scent, then paused before striking. Some were bold and fast, while others hesitated. Over time, researchers noticed that timing mattered too. The snakes moved more during cooler hours, whether morning or night, and their activity shifted with changes in temperature and humidity. With this knowledge, hunters could adjust their strategies and target snakes when they were most active, making each mission far more effective than ever before. The team then decided to take the experiment even further by feeding all the data into machine learning programs. These systems could analyze hundreds of hours of footage and spot patterns humans might miss. like how temperature, time of day, or previous interactions with decoys influenced snake behavior. Within just a few weeks, the program began predicting not only where snakes would appear, but also how they were likely to act in specific conditions. Finally, hunters didn't have to rely on just luck. Instead, they could follow digital maps highlighting the swamp's most active zones. The robotic rabbits had become mobile scouts, gathering intelligence no human could collect on their own. But the surprises didn't stop there. The data also revealed how pythons behaved during the breeding season. Researchers noticed that mature females often followed specific males and avoided certain areas, and tracking these movements led straight to nests and hidden egg clusters deep in the marsh. These nests had been nearly impossible to find for years. Now, teams could safely remove the eggs before they hatched, which helped slow the population in a way old methods never could. At the same time, the rabbits also captured interactions that showed how pythons reacted to other predators, especially alligators. The snakes avoided areas with heavy gator activity, changing their routes to stay safe. This insight saved hunters time and energy, since they no longer wasted effort searching in places the snakes rarely visited. In the process, the robots were doing more than just tracking snakes. They were revealing a hidden web of life in the swamp that humans had never been able to see before. Additionally, these discoveries quickly led to real changes in the field. Hunters could now work in smaller teams and still catch more snakes than ever before. Capture rates improved, and the robotic rabbits became a bridge between observing and acting. Instead of wandering the swamp, hoping to spot a python, teams could head straight to the spots where snakes were most likely to appear. And, as the news spread, public opinion started to shift. People could finally see the footage for themselves. Critics who once called the project a waste began admitting the robots were doing something remarkable. They weren't just tools. They were teaching scientists how pythons lived, hunted, and moved. And the focus wasn't on harming the snakes. It was about understanding them. And as the results kept coming in, researchers realized the potential went even further. This approach could work for other invasive species or even help protect endangered animals. What began as a solution to Florida's python problem had turned into a new way of thinking about wildlife. The Everglades had become a testing ground for the future of conservation, a place where technology and nature could work together to restore balance. But just when everything looked promising, the swamp itself gave a reminder. Success in the Everglades never lasts for long. As the weeks passed, the swamp began to push back. The swamp began to show the robotic rabbits just how unforgiving and unpredictable its terrain could be. The challenges in the swamp. The Everglades is huge, and it stretches across more than 1.5 million acres. Even trained hunters often say the place can swallow you if you are not careful. So when the engineers and biologists brought their robotic rabbits into this wild maze, the swamp quickly made one thing clear. Technology alone wasn't going to win this fight. The plants were thick, the water kept shifting, and the humidity made the equipment act up. Batteries died faster than anyone expected, and some rabbits just stopped working after a few hours in mud or rain. What seemed simple in the lab suddenly turned into a real battle out in the wild. The weather was also another major challenge. In Florida, it often gets over 100 degrees during the day, with humidity that never lets up. This wasn't just uncomfortable for the team, it was tough on the robotic rabbits too. Heat made circuits overheat, scent pads dried out too fast, and tiny motors jammed when moisture got in. Engineers had to make quick fixes, adding insulation, waterproof coatings, and stronger cooling systems. Yet, the swamp always seemed one step ahead. Some robots got carried away by sudden storms, while others sank into mud after heavy rain. Every time they were put out there, it felt like a gamble. Nature itself started causing problems too, and the robotic rabbits were not safe. The swamp is full of predators, and alligators sometimes found the decoys and attacked them with their strong jaws. One rabbit reportedly disappeared completely and was later found in an alligator nest far from where it was placed. Raccoons and other animals also checked out the robots, chewing or pawing at them, which often broke sensors or caused malfunctions. Additionally, not all snakes reacted the same way. Some reportedly came close to the robots but ignored them completely, slithering away without striking. Others attacked for a few seconds and then lost interest. The team realized the snakes weren't just hunting blindly. They were learning. Some even avoided areas where other robots had been attacked before, as if they knew not every prey was worth the risk. This meant the team had to keep moving and redeploying the rabbits to keep the snakes curious. Working in the Everglades was no easy task for the humans either. Teams had to wade through chest-deep water, carry fragile equipment across uneven ground, and keep track of dozens of robotic rabbits at once. Heat exhaustion, mosquitoes, and the constant threat of snakes or alligators were part of the daily grind. Still, the team kept going, motivated by every small win. Each robot that survived a strike or captured useful footage was a victory, and every failure was studied closely to get better next time. On top of that, dealing with public opinion was its own challenge. Local communities and the media watched the experiment closely, and not everyone was convinced it was a good idea. Some critics called it expensive, unnecessary, or even a gimmick. People questioned whether spending thousands of dollars on robotic rabbits was really the smartest way to tackle a problem that had been growing for decades. But despite all these challenges, the robotic rabbits were beginning to prove their value. Even in small numbers, they were bringing snakes out into the open and giving researchers rare chances to study their behavior. Pythons that had stayed hidden for weeks could now be seen striking the decoys, revealing movement patterns and hunting strategies that no drones, dogs, or hunters had ever captured. Every encounter, whether it succeeded or failed, provided important data for the next attempt. The robotic rabbits changed the fight against pythons forever, but they also raised bigger questions about our role in the wild. If a tiny robotic bunny can track one of the smartest predators so closely, what other secrets could technology uncover in nature? And just how far should humans go in controlling the world around us? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you enjoyed this video, click on the next video on your screen.